Good afternoon. I will call to order the Minneapolis City Planning Commission meeting for April 11th. My name is Matt Brown. I serve as president of the commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Kronzer, Magrino, Slack, Sweezy, Lukey-Peer, and Vreeland. Our first item of business is to approve the actions from the March 28th meeting. I have a motion to approve those actions. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Our next item of business is to organize the agenda. We'll determine which items will be on consent and which items we'll discuss. There are hard copies of the agenda in the hallway. So starting at the top, item 1 is the Portland Tower RLS at 516 8th Street South. That's a registered land survey. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 2 is the Star Tribune sign replacement at 800 1st Street North. That's an expansion of a non-conforming use. We'll discuss that item. Item 3 is Downtown East Phase 2 Radisson Red at 619 3rd Street South. That is a conditional use permit. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we will put that on consent. Item 4 is Walgreens at 2640 through 2650 Hennepin Avenue South. That's a site plan review and a minor subdivision. We will discuss item 4. And item 5 is the 1400 Park Avenue Apartments at 1400 Park Avenue, 627 14th Street East and 622 15th Street East. Several applications for a new multifamily building there. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we will put that on consent. So our agenda as amended is items 1, 3, and 5 will be on consent, and we will discuss items 2 and 4. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And that motion carries. Our next item of business is the Committee of the Whole consent agenda. And Vice President Slack, do you have an update for us?
Thank you, President Brown. At the March 31st, 2016 Committee of the Whole, we had one item. It was a land acquisition for 1501 West River Road North, and the recommended motion was approval of the staff report that the item was consistent with the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth.
All right, and I will take that as a motion to find that acquisition consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to the public hearing portion of our meeting. At this time, I'll open the public hearing for the items on the consent agenda. That's item 1, item 3, and item 5. Is there anyone wishing to speak on those items? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing, and commissioners may have a motion to approve the consent agenda. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. We'll move on next to our items for discussion, and we'll start with item 2, the Star Tribune sign replacement, and Ms. Smith is staff.
Good evening, Commissioners. The item before you is located at 800 1st Street North. This is located just to the west of the Mississippi River at the intersection of Plymouth, approximately Plymouth Avenue North and 2nd Street North. The application is for a 408 square foot sign that would replace an existing sign on the Star Tribune building, and it'd be facing the on-site parking lot that's between the building and Plymouth Avenue North. There are several zoning districts that apply to this site, and the one I draw your attention to is the R6 zoning district. That's one of the reasons that we're triggering this expansion of a non-conforming use application. So the applicant is applied for an expansion of a non-conforming use because in the R6 district, you wouldn't be allowed to have this sign. It's a new sign that is proposed to an illegally non-conforming use. It's exceeding the maximum area and height that would normally be allowed under the code. However, there is an existing sign that is already the exact same size, and so the fact that the new sign is illuminated is triggering this expansion of non-conforming use application. Here are a few images just to show you where the existing sign is located. It is a painted wall sign, white paint. It shows the former logo of the company, and it faces the on-site parking lot, as I mentioned, and it is visible from the intersection of Plymouth and 2nd. As you can see, the building wall is 161 feet long, 54 feet tall. Most of it is metal panel. It's this textured metal panel, and the sign would be along in this area of the elevation. So as you can see, the existing and proposed sign would be the exact same dimensions and height. The new sign would be not painted, but it would be an aluminum backer pan with individual lettering that has black perforation on the top, so that at night it would actually appear illuminated, just Star Tribune, the individual lettering, but during the day it would appear black. The lettering, because of the internal illumination, there would be about a 9-inch projection away from the building wall in total. And this just shows you the sign plan. So the applicant has submitted an expansion of a non-conforming use application and must meet these findings. I have these for reference in case we need to look at them later. The staff has recommended approval of the application as proposed. So any permits that come in would need to match exactly what has been submitted to the City Planning Commission. In addition, the Heritage Preservation Commission reviewed this application earlier in the year and approved it with a few conditions related to design. And they just reiterate what's already there. The backer pan shall be painted metallic gray or anodized aluminum. The height of the backer pan shall not exceed 10 feet 3 inches. And there are no conditions of approval recommended as part of this application. So the staff has received one letter of support from the neighborhood association that is included in your packets already. And then since the publication of the staff report, we've received concerns from a neighboring property owner who has concerns about the illumination in particular of the sign, and we'll be speaking to those points, but basically wants to ensure that the illumination is exactly as proposed to the commission tonight. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but the applicant and the neighboring property owner is also here.
All right, commissioners, are there any questions of staff?
One quick question. Does the type of illumination change if it would be non-conforming? If not, so if this were externally illuminated versus backlit, would that change the non-conforming?
So in the code, they're only allowed to have a non-illuminated sign, so the fact that it's illuminated at all triggers the application.
Are there any other questions of staff? If there are none, we can open the public hearing at this time, and I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carol Lansing. I'm an attorney at Faegre Baker Daniels and representing the Star Tribune on these applications. With me is Greg Cardinal, who is also with the Star Tribune. And I'm not sure if Steve Hertz from Nordquist Signs has made it yet, but he was intending to attend. So hopefully if you have questions, he'll be here to address them. The Star Tribune printing plant is a 24/7 operation, printing and distribution operation. It also now houses a large number of office employees who relocated there from the Portland Avenue headquarters. The Star Tribune Media Company is the leading regional newspaper in the area and one of the downtown Minneapolis largest employers. They'd like to have a new, updated, illuminated sign that reflects the activity, the identity, and the community association of that building. We appreciate that the North Loop neighborhood, staff, and the HPC commissioners have all recommended approval of this sign. Recently, my friend, Mr. Min, did contact me with some concerns, and I would like to address those with you as I have with him. The specific size and height of the proposed sign, as mailing indicated, was determined by the size and height of the existing sign. The intent is to cover it over without having to repaint. And they did carefully look at the option of repainting so that that wouldn't have to be a determining factor. But just repainting the sign area is not a de minimis cost, but more importantly, this is a large expanse of metal panel wall clad. It's a grooved metal panel, and it's painted brown and it's faded over time unevenly. And the risk of painting over some of it and having it look like painted over graffiti is something that's unacceptable, and there's really no way to test it before committing to it. Repainting the entire length of the wall, which Mei Ling put up a figure of 160 feet for the length of the wall. That was my number, and it's an error. The stretch of the metal portion of the building that would need to be completely repainted if you took that approach is more like 230 feet, and the length of the entire facade is about 670. So it's a very long building facade. And also to let you know that originally we applied with a 488 square foot sign, and working with staff, it was reduced to 408 to be as tight as possible to achieve just covering the sign. But regardless of that repainting factor, the size and height of the proposed sign is reasonable and appropriate. It's a very unusually large lot and building, and this will come up. The distance, it's got quite a bit of separation from Mr. Min's property is about 400 feet, and from Plymouth, where it primarily faces, about 500 feet. I mean, that's from Mr. Min's property more than a block away because of this large parking lot, and this X marks the spot of where we're proposing to have that sign. Also, I think these photos that are in your packet of the sign from the existing sign from closer than Mr. Min's property and from across Plymouth illustrate that the sign, as you know, be a different sign, but it's going to be the same size, and the sign as it's going to be seen from those distances will not look immensely large or looming. Also note that the sign of the letters, when you talk about the illumination issue, at night, the size of just the illuminated component is less than 180 square feet. So if you're using the 180 square foot limit of a sign in an industrial district as a guide, what will be seen at night will be beneath that amount. And as Mei Ling indicated, one of the issues that Mr. Min raised was a concern about illumination. And just today, hot off the press, we were able to get some information from the sign company about that. The sign letters are going to be covered with black perforated vinyl, so they appear black during the day, but through the perforations, the light shines and it illuminates white at night. And the logo is covered with a green material, and both of those coverings significantly reduce the intensity of the illumination. The sign company has calculated that as measured from 100 feet away, the illumination of the sign would be only 0.1 foot candle, and city code allows signs to be up to 0.5 foot candle measured from a residential property line, and up to 5 foot candles measured from the street or a non-residential. So at 0.1, 100 foot away, it won't even be measurable when you reach a property line. As explained to me, Mr. Min's concerns are primarily because he is considering a residential redevelopment on his property at the corner. You may recall that he obtained rezoning from I-1 to C2 for this development in 2009 and returned in 2003 to have a shopping center approvals renewed. I think it's very important to keep in mind that despite the C2 zoning of this site, it is guided industrial. And that guidance has been reinforced since the 2009 rezoning with the 2010 North Loop Small Area Plan. So again, this is the Star Tribune site. It's guided transitional industrial. That's where the sign is. This is Mr. Min's property. All of this area in dark purple is part of an industrial employment district. And one of the key policies for industrial properties, especially industrial employment districts, is that residential use is not be allowed to impinge on the industrial use and activity of other properties. So this application, and I'm kind of foreshadowing what I think Mr. Min might address, but this application should not be viewed or judged through a lens of a potential adjacent residential use. That would be contrary to the policies and the land use guidance for it. That said, for all the reasons we've discussed, I don't believe that this sign would negatively impact a residential use 400 feet more than a city block away because of the separation, the muted illumination, and the proportionality. Finally, if you have any concerns about this 408 square foot sign as precedent, this site has a number of unique conditions, so I don't think that should be a concern or factor in your considerations. If you have other questions, I'm happy to address them.
Commissioner Kronzer.
Yeah, just maybe a little more detail on the sign. So this is an acrylic face sign that's on a solid metal background, that box, and those acrylic panels that are the letters are covered in vinyl that are either perforated or translucent. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Do you have an example somewhere around town that this would be similar to?
The Marshall sign on the Marshall Student Housing Project just north of Dinkytown has the perforated black vinyl. Otherwise, in terms of, I was driving around at night and thinking about this, there's a lot of like those small billboards that are still in our residential neighborhoods. They're lit up all night. They're larger than this. The Target Field Station has quite a big lit sign. And I think, in these downtown industrial and commercial districts, that kind of signage and light is not that unusual.
Commissioner Lupi-Pierre.
Yeah, hi. So I just for my own clarification here, it appears as though you had mentioned that the new sign will perfectly cover the old lettering. So am I correct in saying that the outcome will be that the letters of the new sign are actually going to technically be smaller than the lettering on the old sign because it's within the box and not occupying the whole extent of the box?
Yes, that would be the result.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions of the speaker? I'd just like some clarification. Ms. Lansing, you suggested that the light level would be 0.1 foot candles. Where was that again? Was that at that northwest property
No,
line?
it was much closer than that. It was measured at 100 feet, or it's calculated because the sign isn't up, calculated at 100 feet from the sign. Further away, the measurement would be 0 at the property line with Mr. Min's property in the Plymouth, 0.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, we can move on to any other speakers. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Todd Ferrara. I am the principal owner, one of the owners of Standard Plymouth LLC. We are the owner that's across the street from the open lot. So we face this sign every day. And the tenant in our building is Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. We built the property in 2008, reclaiming polluted lands and retaining nearly 100 jobs in Minneapolis. When we built the property, we were obligated to observe the Northside Jobs Park Design Guidelines. Those guidelines limit signage, and in particular, backlighting and internally lit signs. We, in fact, went before the Northside Neighborhood Group and requested a similar sign, not knowing, building a new building for our business. And they pointed out the guidelines to us, and they explained that one of the issues was that, light can be shed upon other properties and influence, people's comfort level with walking and being in the area at night and such. So I have the design guidelines. So we, in particular, we think that the proposed sign will be larger than a bulletin board. I have a picture of showing you a little bit about, let's see here, where our property is across. This is our property. And we have a sign up here, and it is not illuminated. We could shed light on it, but we couldn't illuminate the sign. So us looking, it's kind of hard to see here, but their sign is about there. I don't think this is really an accurate representation, but you can kind of get a feel for we're across the street. And so even though it's, even though we're in an industrial zone, I don't see any reason why the designated sign should render our property, susceptible to glowing or, illuminated signage, like what would be on a billboard or a highway. So we're concerned about the brightness of it being in particular. So we do not find the staff report explanation that repainting the sign would require repainting the whole building. We think you could just repaint the letters that are there. And we don't have any evidence today that would suggest the color matching would pose any problems. If the sign needs to be repainted, just repaint the sign. You don't have to repaint the whole wall. Again, we just think that it shouldn't be an illuminated sign, that it could just be as is. If they wanted to shed light on the sign, and I can provide you a copy of my comments for the record, if that's okay with you.
All right, yeah, you can submit those to the clerk. Commissioner Lupke here, you have a question
Yeah,
for
I
the
was just,
speaker.
what are your hours of operation?
We are open for business from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And in particular in the fall and winter, we're there quite a bit.
Okay, so I'm just
We're
trying
there
to,
later than that, but those are
Okay.
open hours.
can you explain to me the concern, since you're mainly closed when their light would be on, what the concern is?
Just that the neighborhood standard that we are in, being across the street, is different for them than it is for us.
Consistency is
And
your
that,
concern.
right, exactly. And that was pointed out to us, that the point was that they just didn't want light shed from a business on that street and sidewalk.
Thank you.
They thought that it would impact how it is walking on the sidewalk. And so we said, okay, well, so we looked at alternative signs, and they convinced us that if you wanted to light up your sign, you just shed light on the sign, not illuminating onto the other property. So that is a design guideline that made sense to us, of course. We didn't, and so I can give you my comments and then the criteria, which we understand this property is across the street from the design guidelines, but we just think if it's a non-conforming use, see no reason why it shouldn't conform,
All right, are there any other questions of the speaker? If there are none, we can move on to other speakers. Is there anyone else who would like to address the
Thank you.
commission? Please state your name and address.
Mr. President, members of the commission, my name is Stephen Min. I'm with Luca Development Partners, and I'm also in this particular circumstance with an entity called Plymouth and Second LLC. We are the property owners immediately adjacent to the Star Tribune plant. This is a vacant 38,000 square foot parcel of land that we acquired from MnDOT with the help of the city of Minneapolis. I think that's the best perspective I'll leave for you right now. My office address, by the way, for the record, is 1701 Madison Street Northeast, Suite 111. For the record, I just would like to state from the onset that we did not receive any notice from the HPC regarding the hearing on this issue at HPC. We did get the mailed notice for CPC. Had we been given the mailed notice about HPC, we would have appeared and offered to the record, which the staff record does not reflect in HPC nor in this report, that the Northside Jobs Report regarding side guidelines is actually quite restrictive about illuminated signs, backlit signs, internally illuminated signs, and signs in excess of 108 square feet. Now, the Star Tribune plant is not in the district, but it is on the border of the district. And it just would be incumbent, I think, the HBC should have considered, and I think this panel should consider, that any impact on the boundary of a district should have some mitigating factors to it when you consider whether a non-conforming expansion is necessary. We are not in favor of an illuminated sign being 408 square feet for the same reasons articulated by Mr. Ferrara. In particular, we don't believe that repainting the building or a portion of the metal exterior siding is that big a challenge. In my development work, I repaint cementitious fiber and metal siding all the time. We have to make repairs, we do patchwork, and quite frankly, the spectrometry by computer to get color matching even to faded paint is quite sophisticated, quite readily available. You can go to Home Depot and get a color match unfaded paint today. So with respect to my friend Ms. Lansing, I think that issue is quite not nearly as dramatic a financial impact to our friends at the Star Tribune as they would suggest. They could repaint the existing sign, the background, black it out, and then put a new painted sign of the current size without having to repaint the entire siding of the building. And if that is not the case that this panel wants to decide, I'd ask the Star Tribune to test that and have a painting expert come in and talk about it. I want to correct one item that Ms. Lansing mentioned. We received rezoning on our parcel in 2009 to C2 with the express purpose of not being industrial property. We actually requested the staff not further upgrade to C3A. Ms. Elliott was pressing that issue for the entire part of North Loop. And because we wanted to retain a drive-through option for our retail or commercial use at the time, we asked to hang on to C2. Our parcel is clearly not guided for industrial. If it is in the record still guided for industrial, that is a mistake at the staff level, not comporting with the comprehensive plan in accordance with state statute. That's not our fault. That'd be somebody else's fault. But we were changed to C2 and guided for retail, not industrial. I also like to make a point that the C2 permit, or excuse me, C2 zoning permits housing by right, 700 feet per dwelling unit. And we would be entitled by right to 56 units before we got into any ministerial bonuses such as underground parking. We would prefer not to have such a large illuminated sign over either a retail use or a residential use on our parcel. If we were able to pursue residential at some future date, and there seems to be willingness with the CPED staff to allow us to do that at some future date, there are no restrictions on the land in terms of the fee title to preventing us from making a development agreement change with the staff that would allow for residential use. There's an agreement in place which the staff has agreed to terminate that restricts it to retail approved use right now, but they have agreed to terminate that agreement. And we are undertaking the possibility of doing affordable housing on this site. If over our objection, the commission chooses to permit such a large expansion of the non-conforming use, notwithstanding the much smaller 108 square foot limitation of the adjacent Jobs Park guidelines that have just been distributed to you, we would ask the commission to place 3 additional conditions on the condition of approval. And I'll articulate these verbally, and I have it written, and I'll give written remarks to the commission to review. Our first request is that the perforated vinyl screen on the Star Tribune letters proposed by the applicant be a condition of the approval to minimize the brightness of the sign under the expanded nonconformance. The second condition we ask for is that the illumination area be limited to no more than 103 feet on the letters, which is what Ms. Lansing told me was the size of the letters, and 44 square feet for the star, and that the back panel shall never be illuminated as a condition of approval. And finally, based on the data that Ms. Lansing shared with me earlier this afternoon, if the total lumens measured by foot candle at the sign boundary, at the property boundary, if they are no greater than what the current light level is for their parking lot lights. They have parking lot lights. They're shielded and hooded. They're downward. If the lumens and foot candle measurement is no greater than what we're already suffering from the parking lot, then we have no problem with their illumination level. But if it's greater than or increases the illumination level, we'd like that to be restricted. Those are the end of my remarks. Mr. President, I'd be happy to take questions or distribute my remarks for the record.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? If there are none, we can move on to any other speakers. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we just have one application before us. Are there any further questions of staff, or would someone like to start off the discussion with a motion? Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Yeah, Mei-Ling, so can we just get clarification on whether or not this type of sign is allowed or not? We've heard it's not allowed in the district, it's allowed in this district, but not across the street. What does the site ordinance have to say about this?
Okay, so it's currently it's a legal non-conforming use based on its size in the because the site has R6 zoning on a portion of it, which is just along the Mississippi River. That's why we're doing this application. The North Side Jobs Park guidelines, which were adopted in 1997, do not apply to this site at all. They apply across the street. So those are not something that we would evaluate, and they're also not the zoning code. The zoning code has been updated since 1997. We do have 2 small area plans that cover this parcel, but we do not evaluate those for the expansion of nonconforming use guidelines. So we're looking strictly at Chapter 543, which is where we're getting this application from.
But I was just in terms of it, everything else aside, if this were just a sign being proposed, not because it already exists and it's not conforming, but would we allow this type of sign elsewhere?
This type of sign would be allowed. An
Okay.
internally illuminated sign would be allowed.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I have one more question, Mei Ling. So to clarify, if they were simply replacing the painted sign with an illuminated sign and it was not any larger, that would not require any approval from us, but it would have required the certificate of appropriateness from the HBC.
If I can just rephrase maybe what you're asking, if it were not illuminated, it would not require the certificate of appropriateness or the expansion of a nonconforming use. So the illumination has triggered both of those.
Okay. Are there any other questions of staff? Would anyone like to start things off with a motion? One application before us. Commissioner Kranzer.
I'll get the ball rolling here with a proposed motion. I'd like to approve, staff recommendation to approve the expansion of nonconforming use of a wall sign with one additional condition, and that is that the sign is installed as proposed today with perforated vinyl on the letters, and also the area of the letters and star are per the design we have in front of us.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Vreeland.
It's a lot more consistent with the header that's on the newspaper people read, if they still read the actual news.
All right, and I will just add, we heard a couple speakers touch on the illumination level and concerns about illumination. I think in this case, it's pretty clear that the illumination level of the sign is well within what's allowed by city code. So I don't particularly share those concerns. And I think, given that it's a very small expansion of the sign's area, it shouldn't have very significant impacts on the surrounding property. So if there's no further discussion, we can vote. Clerk, please call the roll.
Vreeland.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
Slack.
Aye.
Magrino.
Aye.
Lipke-Pier.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
8-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 2. Our next item for discussion today is item 4, which is Walgreens at 2640 through 2650 Hennepin Avenue South. And Ms. Holeen is staff. And we saw this item just a few weeks ago, and maybe Kimberly, you can talk a little bit about the changes that have been made since that time.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. This is the Walgreens project at 2650 Hennepin Avenue South. This project was before you on the March 14th meeting, and we had a pretty lengthy discussion at that time about the design of the building, not so much about site design. So here it is outlined in bold at the corner of 27th and Hennepin. The applicant has updated the elevations. I'll not so quickly get us there. The updated elevations, here's a rendering that shows the building is now all brick. There's a cornice. The windows have changed. Let's see. Here's a top down. So the top picture here is the current proposal, and the bottom picture under the north perspective is what was seen on March 14th. So you can see they've eliminated that kind of cap element at the corner and overall changed the design of the building to look a little bit more like the Highland Park Walgreens, which is one of the examples that was brought up at that March 14th meeting. That one is all brick. The height of the building has increased, so it's not a two-story building, or it doesn't function as a two-story building, but there are now windows in the second floor that would be clear glazing to provide light into the building, but again, there's no floor in that location. And then the west elevation is something that we did discuss at great length at the previous meeting as well. This is the elevation that needed the most alternative compliance for windows and blank walls. So there are no blank walls on that elevation now. The windows on the first floor are still at 15.7% instead of 30, so they do still need alternative compliance on the first floor there. Again, this is a fairly unique situation in that they have a window requirement on all 4 sides of the building. And then the second floor elevation on this side actually meets the window requirement. The only other location where they needed alternative compliance is the second floor window requirement on the north elevation, which is here. And that's primarily just, due to the location of the sign and where the windows are in terms of the elevation, that it wouldn't carry over to the corner element here. So they are seeking alternative compliance for that requirement. So specifically what we talked about, just as a refresher, March 14th, some of the comments were to do inset windows, which they are now proposing to do awnings, which they are proposing to do. I should take a step back here. You'll note in your packets, there's a slightly updated version of the elevations that has solid awnings. And this top perspective here actually shows those changes. So the mullion pattern and color has slightly changed, and there are solid awnings now based on the conversation with the neighborhood group. So vary the roof line, provide a cornice, do some brick or metal detailing that's more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood, eliminate the hat or corner element, and just overall come up with something that's a little bit more consistent with the character of buildings along Hennepin in this location. So these are the updates. They did not move the corner entrance, which they did not move the entrance to the corner of 27th and Hennepin. It's still at the corner by the parking lot. That's another thing we talked about at length. They did provide some just additional information about why they don't want to do that based on the clientele served by the store. So I can answer any questions you might have, and the applicant is also here.
All right, are there any questions of staff? All right, if there are none at the moment, we can open the public hearing on this item, and I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having us back. It's Marcy Westlock. I'm with Alon Design Lab, and I'm representing the owner. Address is 1701 Madison Street. As Kimberly highlighted for us, we did go back to the drawing board with the neighborhood group, met with them at length about some of the elements in the neighborhood that we can incorporate, highlighting the variable roof height, the clear story windows, the cornice detailing, the mullion detailing to update and be more reflective of the neighborhood. The warmer colors in addition to that. Everything else on the conditional approvals is acceptable to us. The entry location, we chose not to move again because of the accessibility to the parking lot, to the bike rack location as well, which has been moved closer to the entry and away from the road. In addition, with the variable roof height on the corner of 27th and Hennepin, we feel it gives it still more of a prominence at the corner without actually relocating the entry point. Also, the confusion from the bus and the pedestrian movements at the corner we felt would be better accessible if it's maintained interior to the parking. I do have the architect, Roger Thompson, here too, if you guys have specific questions on the architectural elements that were introduced. With that, I'll thank you for your time and open it up to questions.
All right, are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Kronzer.
A couple of quick ones. What is the purpose of the canopies?
They were originally for sunshades. They were open, slatted detail. Per discussions with the neighborhoods, they've now been closed. So it's just to provide relief along that facade and provide some sort of
Would you maybe
shelter.
say pedestrian scale?
What's that?
Pedestrian scale, maybe?
You want to address that?
I asked that because they look like they're 20 plus feet off the ground, which,
Oh, I don't know,
Isn't-
12 feet, I believe.
so maybe a little clarification. on
Roger
that.
Thompson from ArcNet. It's a 12-foot height from the sidewalk to the bottom of the canopy. And they'd provide not only shading to the windows, but also rain protection for pedestrians since they're now enclosed, and provide some scale, smaller pedestrian scale to the
So
building.
on
as
that
well.
point of scale, could you drop that down to the next lowest million?
Could we drop
From
them?
a constructability perspective?
Well, we did want to make sure we weren't within jumping height of pedestrians, so it was
Well, that's fair.
a little bit of a safety factor in not wanting
But
to
I mean,
have to
not
structure
too
something.
many people can grab a 10-foot basketball hoop. I know, think anyone in this room.
My son could, and he would jump up there.
But it is possible to drop that down a little bit.
It is possible.
Can you just then explain what the cornice is made out of? And maybe that's self-evident. Is it metal or?
It'd be a composite material, a low-maintenance composite material. It would be a,
Like a vinyl?
pardon me?
A vinyl?
It'd be like a foam or a protected foam kind of a product.
Not EFIS.
Pardon me?
Not EFIS.
No.
Okay. So it's a synthetic material.
Synthetic
That's
material.
not EFIS.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Are there any further questions of the applicant? Commissioner Lukey here.
Sorry, hi. I had some questions related to the architecture too. So when I was looking at this, I noted the added cornices on the top, but I wondered if there was any thought to how the corners at the bases of those columns, since they appear like columns meet the ground, there's no bases to them. Is there any thought to doing that as well, just to tie it up so it kind of has the same vocabulary from top to bottom, or just a question?
To add additional detail to the base of the column?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that had come up at all or been in consideration.
No, it hasn't. It hadn't come up. It was probably a maintenance issue. It's something that close to the sidewalk.
Could you consider it though out of like a cast product or something, or no? I'm just wondering.
It would have to probably be some kind of a stone product in order to be durable enough in that location.
And my second question was in relation to the second story window. So when I looked at the different renderings, the perspective kind of with the middle section where you have the two, one on the screen right now, the top picture, middle section.
Okay.
The way the window height is, from the straight elevation when I looked at it, it was disjointed because it's at such a low height that your brain realizes it's not a second floor because the floor height from the windows adjacent to it would run into the windows. So,
Right.
But from this perspective, it almost appears to make that recess a little bit, and I didn't know if that was intentional or not. But when I look at the other corners, where you actually have the little upper windows on the corners instead of the middle, it kind of reads as funny. And I'm wondering, is there a way to either move those windows up, or I wish it was a real second story. I understand you don't have to do a real second story, but if you're going to go for a forced perspective to make people think it's a second story, it might be nice to kind of have it so it actually psychologically makes sense when people look at it. And I'm just thinking that top image, the far right side, you can tell that there really couldn't possibly be a floor there. And I don't think people realize it as much as they'll just think something looks weird with the building and they won't put their finger on why unless they're an architect. So is there a way to maybe even move those windows up a little, just to, play off the Disneyland big second story, and make it seem real?
We'd have to raise the parapet of the entire building. That's kind of the maximum height for the ceiling in that particular area of the roof. But actually in that area, there actually is there's a mezzanine in that particular area. So those are actual functioning daylight windows in the mezzanine space on the second floor. So that one will actually read much more like a true second floor from the exterior. The ones on Hennepin and on 27th, you'll actually be looking into the large retail space of Walgreens itself. So that it'll be obvious that it's not a two-story structure because you'll be looking at the the ceiling inside and
Great,
illuminated the same as the retail space.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions of the speaker? If there are none, we can move on to any other speakers. Is there anyone else who would like to address the commission on this item? Yes, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, President Brown, members of the Plan Commission. My name is Andrew Degerstrom, President of the East Isles Residents Association. Our address is 2751 Hennepin Avenue South, Box 294. So, we were here about 4 or 5 weeks ago talking about this issue. The neighborhood's objections regarding the lack of density still remain. However, there's really no way it's going to become a more a denser building. So instead, the focus was on making sure we can get a design that's much more in keeping with the neighborhood and the surrounding buildings. And regarding the changes that have been made, overall, we have been very pleased with the design changes. Specifically, we kind of negotiated a little bit regarding the window mullions and also the color of the mullions, and those got updated based off those conversations. And I would just mention regarding the location of the entrance, we still do not have an official recommendation one way or the other regarding the entrance. We actually did have some additional conversation or discussion about it, and we still did not reach any consensus one way or the other. So, but other than that, we've been very happy with their willingness to work with us on the design, and we are very much happy, more happy with the changes as opposed to last time. So if there's any other questions, I'd just like to thank the Commission for your reconsideration of this project. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, are there any further questions, or would someone like to start us off with the motion? Commissioner Slack.
Yeah, I have one question for staff, and it relates to, sorry, I have to go back to it. Item number 6, condition number 6. No shelving signage, merchandise, newspaper racks, similar fixtures shall be placed in front of required ground level transparent windows. Is that on all 4 sides?
It is, and the floor plan submitted by the applicant did include a specific merchandising plan that show that the windows will remain unobstructed once it's built out. So where you do see, there's, I think in one location on the back, you see like some, or on the north side, you see like a cash register in that, but they did provide shelf height and counter height and all the specifics that we need to make sure that those windows will remain open and meet the requirements.
Commissioner Magrino.
Sorry if this was mentioned. Are those second-story windows, are those fake, or do those go into like actual open space in the retail area?
So there's a mezzanine that's back in here. There's a mezzanine that essentially provides storage and kind of back of house operations. So the windows do line up with the floor height of that mezzanine. And then elsewhere in the store, they just kind of look into, there's no floor space in the rest of it, but they are clear windows. So they do provide daylighting into the store.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. Commissioner Slack.
I'll make a motion. Motion to approve staff recommendation for item A, site plan review for 16,317 square foot building with a drive-thru. With the, with the 8 listed conditions.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Kronzer.
Could you repeat the motion, please?
The motion is to approve staff recommendation for item A, site plan review with the 8 listed conditions.
Commissioner Kronzer and then Commissioner
Second. I do have 2 hopefully friendly amendments to add to that. I'll pass around the second one. Just kind of some of the things we were just talking about pedestrian scale, and pedestrian is a very heavy pedestrian area. A couple of minor tweaks to those canopies would be welcomed. But the entry point to the store, I think, is of most concern. And I do thank the applicant for coming back with a very revised application. But my first, I guess that would be condition number 6. Is that right? Would be to work with staff to lower the canopy to approximately the 10-foot range above the sidewalk. And then the second proposed condition would be to, for the primary entry and the tower element to be relocated within 25 feet of the intersection of Hennepin Avenue South and West 27th Street as measured from the property lines. And I can speak more to that if you have.
All right. Are there any questions or need for clarification? And Commissioner Kronzer, maybe you could repeat your first condition regarding the height you're proposing for the canopy.
Certainly. It's work with staff to lower the canopies to a more pedestrian scale, something around the 10-foot range above the sidewalk.
And Mr. Wittenberg.
Commissioner Kronzer, if I could just clarify one piece of information related to your motion regarding the entrance location. You mentioned relocating the entrance. If the applicant were to decide to provide 2 entrances, including one in the location that you're suggesting, would that align with your intent?
Not as this motion is currently laid out. I leave that to the commission to see if this proposed motion carries.
All right. So I think, well, Commissioner Sweezy, did you have anything to add? Okay. Is there any further discussion on that, on Commissioner Kronzer's amendment? And then maybe we should vote on the amendment. Commissioner Vreeland.
I work in schools, and 10 feet is a pretty interesting challenge to try to reach. And my kids can dunk, although I can't. 11 feet might be a better height for the reasons that were discussed by the applicant.
All right. And in that motion language, we're not listing a specific height other than to work with staff, unless I'm not capturing that correctly. Commissioner Kronzer, maybe you could clarify that motion. I thought when you clarified it, you had just suggested the applicant work with
the
staff.
idea is to bring it down a little bit. I recognize 10 feet is a dunkable height, so Commissioner Gagnon is also telling me her son can dunk. So it's not a prescriptive 10 feet, but it's something near that. That's a little bit closer to the pedestrian zone. That's safe and provides something that'll be long-lasting and won't be at risk of vandalism, but will be a little bit closer to the ground. I was trying to make that as prescriptive and as open as possible.
All right. I think we understand that now. Well, first of all, do we have a second on adding those 2 conditions? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? This is just on the 2 conditions that Commissioner Kronzer is proposing.
I have handed out a listing of justifications from the comp plan. I don't know if I need to state them now or if that's suitable for the record.
I think this is probably suitable for the record, although maybe you could hit some of the highlights.
Sure.
So everyone's clear on that.
Land use policy 1.1, achieving to reach the highest possible design and development standards, enhance the environment, public health, support a mix of uses, promote flexibility. Let's see, urban design, support urban design centers that emphasize a traditional urban form in commercial areas. I think that's pretty self-evident. Seek urban design 10.11, seek new commercial developments that is attractive, functional, and adds value to the physical environment.
All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion to add those 2 conditions?
I just have a question about whether it's, so this is something we hadn't discussed previously. Does the applicant get a chance to describe
well,
issues about the entrances?
If you'd like to ask a question of the applicant, you're welcome to do so.
I guess my question is, how difficult is accomplishing that and what problems might it cause or solve?
And maybe we could have the applicant answer that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
Oh, we're discussing an amendment for recommending a different entrance, and I'm wondering what problems that would cause or solve from your perspective.
My name's Howard Bergerud. I'm a consultant for Walgreens and working with the owner, Road OSHA, who will actually own the building and lease it back to Walgreens. Moving the entrance to the corner creates a lot of issues, both for operations and for servicing of the building. One of the reasons we decided to put the entrance next to the parking lot, well, there are a lot of reasons, but and we also have an entrance on Hennepin, but people that lack mobility, it's easy for them to walk from the parking lot to the entrance versus 100 feet down the street. The bike racks are in the parking lot, so people riding bikes can park in the parking lot and get in easily. Also, all the people walking to the store come from different directions. They all don't come from the south. Some come from the north, the east, the west. So it's sort of a percentage of people that would be closer to the corner on one side and closer to the parking lot on the other. So, and of course, setting up the entire operations of Walgreens store to change the location of the door would be a monumental task. But we think it's a great compromise where it is, where a lot of people come from, especially the people that aren't mobile, that have a hard time walking. It'd be great for them to park in the parking lot, have a short walk versus going down 90 feet to the corner.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Kronzer.
I just wanted to respond to that. Actually, in a former life, did some design work for Walgreens, so I know what these folks are working on and up to, and how Walgreens views these things. Walgreens prefers the entry where it is. There's no question about that. I think if I'm driving in an automobile to this site, I prefer the entry where it is. But Walgreens will make accommodations when required to by city policy or by development and those things. So I've witnessed Walgreens having to redesign buildings for cities here in Minnesota that are prescribed per their zoning code. So there's certainly a preference for the location of the entry where it is, but given the flatness of the sidewalk and the high level of pedestrians, I don't see those as impediments to this, in my opinion.
All right. Commissioner Magrino.
We sort of talked about it for a second earlier. So the way this motion is currently written, it does specifically state the primary entry, and I think Commissioner Kronzer, you said that you didn't, it sounded like you didn't feel strongly that they could maybe have two different entrances, or two, sort of maybe just keep.
So my motion is for the primary entrance to be at the corner. I have no problem with multiple entrances into the building.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no further discussion, why don't we vote on the addition of those two conditions? And I think we can probably do that on a voice vote. So all in favor of adding those two conditions signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that motion carries. We can go back to the original motion to approve item A, the site plan review, now with 10 stated conditions. And is there any further discussion on that? If there is none, clerk, please call the roll. Commissioner Bender has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to briefly mention that I really appreciate all the work that went into working with the neighborhood to improve this design, and the folks that really stepped up within the East Isles neighborhood to work with the development team to get where we are. I think this was really much improved, and really appreciate all the work that went into those improvements.
All right. We can go on to the roll call.
Bender?
Aye.
Gagnon?
Aye.
Kronzer?
Aye.
Lipke-Peer?
Aye.
Magrino?
Aye.
Slack?
Aye.
Sweezy? Aye. Breland?
Aye.
8-0.
Okay, and then next we have the minor subdivision. Commissioner Slack.
Make a motion to approve item B, minor subdivision.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Breland.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. Slack.
Aye.
Magrino.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Cronzer.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
8-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 4 and also concludes our meeting for today. We have committee of the whole on Thursday, and our next meeting is April 25th.